Hello everybody, welcome back to Diamine Lab. This video will discuss topic 2.8 of the IB Biology syllabus, which is about cellular respiration. These are the parts of the syllabus that the video will cover. So starting off with the concept of cellular respiration as a whole, it is how our body converts energy stored within the food we consume into energy that the body can use. So I think if we look at the word respiration, we're immediately going to think about taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide, which is not necessarily wrong, because if we look at the equation here, we're taking in glucose, which is the organic molecule, and along with oxygen, we can break it down into carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, which is the energy currency that our body uses. And these are released as waste products. But if you're thinking about cellular respiration as the process of inhaling and exhaling air, that refers more to ventilation, because cellular respiration refers specifically to converting biochemical energy from organic molecules, which is the food we eat, into this specific form of energy called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy that is used to fuel our bodily processes. In plants, this organic compound used is carbohydrates, lipid from photosynthesis, and for animals, it's mainly carbohydrates, but lipids and proteins may also be used if carbohydrates aren't available. So let's talk more about ATP. So in the process of cellular respiration, glucose is converted into chemical energy that the cell can use. And this energy is stored within the molecules of ATP. So basically, during cellular respiration, this molecule called ADP, and if we look at the name, di refers to 2, in contrast with adenosine triphosphate, it refers to 3. So adenosine diphosphate contains 2 phosphate groups, while adenosine triphosphate contains 3 phosphate groups. So during cellular respiration, the energy that is released from glucose is used to bond another phosphate group to ADP. And because they're adding in another phosphate group, it becomes diphosphate to triphosphate. So this energy is basically stored between the second and the third phosphate group of ATP. ATP is used because it can diffuse to any cell part and release energy, and it's immediately available. An example of uses is powering active transport, which is movement against the concentration gradient across the membrane, synthesizing polymers from smaller monomers, moving structures within the cell, such as transportory vesicles, as well as enzymatic reactions that otherwise proceed very slowly. And if you're still kind of confused about the process of ATP, think of ATP as this little guy who's giving out money, and this is basically energy. So ATP just breaks off this bond, which is the bond between the second and the third phosphate group. And from ATP, it will turn into ADP. And in cellular respiration, it will turn back to ATP. This is a better visual diagram if you're still kind of confused between the conversion of ATP and ADP. So this is what the molecule looks like before cellular respiration. It has 2 phosphate groups. This is ribose. This is adenine, which is a nitrogenous base. Cellular respiration, this third phosphate group is added here. So because this refers to 2,2-phosphate, adenosine diphosphate, because in cellular respiration a third phosphate group is added, it will become 3 phosphate groups. So therefore it becomes adenosine triphosphate. And when ATP wants to release this energy, all they need to do is break off this bond between the extra phosphate group in a process called hydrolysis. So hydrolysis, if we break down this word, lysis refers to splitting, and hydro refers to water. So it's basically breaking down a larger molecule with water as a byproduct. So when they break off this bond, they produce water, and they will transfer this phosphate group, which is basically the energy, and then it returns to ADP. So cells must continuously perform cellular respiration because ATP cannot be stored for later use. It is usually immediately used by the cell. It cannot be transferred from cell to cell, and when ATP is used, heat energy cannot be reused and will be lost in the environment. which is why when you look at a food pyramid, for example, the amount of energy that passes from a trophic level to another is only about 10%. This is because heat energy is lost to the environment. So cellular respiration can either proceed with oxygen or without oxygen. So with oxygen, a larger ATP yield can be produced, which is called aerobic. And if there is no oxygen, only around 2 molecules of ATP can be created, and it's a process called anaerobic respiration. How I remember the two is basically just think of this N as no O2. I don't know if that helps, but I hope it does. So, in anaerobic respiration, it's basically going from glycolysis to fermentation. So glycolysis is glyco means sugar, lysis means splitting, so it's a splitting of sugar, the sugar being glucose. So if we look at glucose, it has 6 carbons. After glycolysis, there are 2 molecules and each of it has 3 carbons. When glucose is broken down into a smaller molecule, it produces ATP, which is the energy that we need. So you might be wondering why we carry out anaerobic respiration if it produces a way smaller yield of ATP. This is because it is back up when cellular oxygen is depleted. We'll discuss more about this later. So basically, muscle cells use up more oxygen than it can be replenished. So anaerobic respiration is done because it is a shorter process to provide ATP without oxygen. When ATP is needed quick and for microbes in is low oxygen or oxygen-free environments that will otherwise be empty. After glycolysis, yeast, which perform anaerobic respiration, carry out this process called alcohol fermentation. And during alcohol fermentation, they produce ethanol and carbon dioxide as waste products. However, scientists have discovered that this process performed by yeast has applications to us as humans, which is why yeast are usually used in the food industry. So if we think about baking bread in particular, we usually mix yeast into the dough. This is because yeast will take up the oxygen and release carbon dioxide and ethanol because they're performing anaerobic respiration. And this carbon dioxide that is released by the yeast will cause the dough to rise, which is why people usually, when they're baking, they leave the dough and cover it with a mat, and after hours after they take it out, the dough will rise. This is because the yeast has performed anaerobic respiration. And when during baking, sorry, this should be baking, ethanol will evaporate. In the production of alcohol, which is a beverage, the yeast is cultured in a liquid which contains sugar to carry out anaerobic respiration, and because it will break down the glucose and release ethanol carbon dioxide, this ethanol concentration will rise around 14%, and the carbon dioxide will bubble out, and most alcoholic beverages are brewed this way. So in humans, rather than alcohol fermentation, we carry out lactate production. So rather than producing ethanol and carbon dioxide, humans, when undergoing anaerobic respiration, will produce lactic acid. So when we're performing high intensity exercise, if you notice, we're needing more oxygen than what we normally require. The amount of oxygen we need will exceed the rate that our body can perform aerobic respiration, which is supplied with ATP. Because of this, the muscle cells will start breaking down glucose anaerobically without oxygen to supply ATP for a short period of time. So the ATP produces little, but it allows them to provide enough ATP for a short period of time without oxygen, which is why if we look at heavy lifters such as Chris Bumstead here, he can carry out certain movements such as, for example, squats or deadlifts without the presence of oxygen, so they holding their breath and still be able to perform the move. This is because his muscle cells are basically breaking down glucose anaerobically without oxygen in order to provide him with ATP for a short period of time. And another situation is red blood cells do not have mitochondria. Red blood cells are the cells that look like that thin flat shape. Therefore, they always carry out aerobic respiration. One thing to note when we're carrying out anaerobic respiration is that lactic acid will be produced, for example, during high intensity exercise, and this lactic acid will then be broken down after the cells carry out anaerobic respiration. And this is aerobic respiration. This will be discussed more in detail if you take HL biology and 8.2. But if you're just taking the SL course, all you need to know is that in aerobic respiration, glucose can be more fully broken down for a larger ATP yield, which is done in the mitochondria, and the process is called link reaction, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain.